All right. We are, God willing, going to get the rest of the way to chapter 23, through chapter 23 today. We'll see. Last week we did chapters 13 and 14 and a little piece of, or possibly all of chapter 21. This was mostly dealing with Babylon. And now we're going to pick up at the end of chapter 14, not where we probably won't read any of it. I'm just going to sort of outline it, highlight it, and we're going to move on. The end of chapter 14 of Isaiah is dealing with Assyria and Philistia. Assyria, remember, is the big empire of the time, north of Babylon. And
added to reminders.
Thanks, Siri. I don't know what Siri just added to my reminder, but... Oh, okay. It's going to remind me that this is the big empire of all time. Assyria sounds like that, apparently. Sorry. Wow.
Siri's always listening.
Apparently, yes.
The CIA agents or the
Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. We won't mention Iraq, you know. We won't mention Syria. So, all right. So, this empire up north of Babylon, with capital at Nineveh, they're the major empire of Isaiah's day, and they're largely coming through Syria, as you can see by the map here, to get into the area of Israel. So Assyria has to control or conquer Syria to get down to Israel, and Assyria is controlling everything and kind of fighting off and on, usually winning a war with Egypt throughout this period. So Assyria, we get 3 verses here, and what they amount to is Assyria's destruction is assured, which is good news for Israel and Judah at the time. Although that good news won't be fast enough for Israel, because remember, in Isaiah's day, Israel is carried off by the Assyrians, the northern kingdom, carried off and spread hither and yon, and nobody has any idea. That's the northern tribes, remember? And that will be in Isaiah's day. He's going to see this happen. He lives in Jerusalem, in Judah, in the southern kingdom. And they are under attack by Assyria throughout Isaiah's life. But Assyria never manages to actually conquer them. And then the last part of Isaiah 14 gets to Philistia, the Philistines. It's funny because, we are, at this point in history, we are, hundreds of years after David's time. And, the Philistines have been a problem since the time of the Judges. Basically, since the time that the nation of Israel came out of Egypt and entered Israel, the Philistines have been this thorn in their side all the time. And Isaiah prophesies to the Philistines and basically says, by the time Ahaz is dead, Ahaz, remember, being the second to last king that Isaiah is sort of connected with in time here. Ahaz is an evil king, remember, but God is promising that by Ahaz's death, Philistia's destruction from the north is assured. Basically, Assyria is going to work their way down through the northern kingdom of Israel and take out the Philistines. The Philistines kind of disappeared from history. They're just gone. Their name remains, interestingly enough, because the Romans showed up and asked local historians, so what was the name of this place? When they were trying to name their different, the new provinces that they were establishing in this area, when the Romans showed up, they were like, what should we call this place? Who used to live here? And everybody said, the Philistines. Oh, okay. Well, we'll call it Palestina. We'll turn that into a Latin name, and we'll call it Palestina. So if you're ever wondering where the name Palestine came from, the Philistines. That's kind of weird, isn't it? And that's about the only way they've survived in history. That and a lot of stories in the Bible about them. Yeah, But it is also interesting that Palestine is largely associated with people who act like Philistines. So, I don't know. God, I don't know if you'd call that a sense of humor, but I don't know. There's something kind of running through this, and I am not saying that prophecies about Philistines apply to Palestinians, but it's just an interesting point. It's just something where you kind of scratch your head and go, that is weird. Yeah, the Gaza Strip, that is Philistia. Gaza was one of the 5 cities of the Philistines. You remember that from Samson last year. Remember? Yeah. So anyway, just interesting, odd little trivia, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on interesting trivia because I have a lot of chapters to do today. Chapters 15 and 16 of Isaiah are about Moab. And we are not going to get deeply into those. Hang on, I'm catching up with myself here. Isaiah chapters 15 and 16 is about Moab. Moab survived up to just before Jesus' time, really. The Moabites just sort of, they were sort of assimilated into the other nations, what we now think of as the Arab tribes of the area. That's how the Moabites ended up. Moab was part of the area on the other side of the Jordan, what we would think of now maybe as Jordan. Over here, mostly south, but a little bit north of the Dead Sea. So, near Jericho, places like that. Moab, you'll remember, came from Lot's daughter, and Lot. Sad story. And it's interesting because these chapters just sort of mention that Moab has built itself up in great pride because it survived all the way up to this point. And, as is common with Isaiah likes to point out pride and show how it's going to fall. And he says that their pride will be reduced to nothing and they will flee to Zoar, which is interesting. It's sort of a weird little circle in God's history of Moab because Moab... You remember that when Lot was fleeing from Sodom and Gomorrah with his family, and he lost his wife on the way because, his wife was sad about leaving, and anyway. So she did. Yeah, she was very salty, yes. So he and his daughters got out, and they fled to the only place that God had set aside in the area that he was going to save for their sakes, and that was Zoar, interestingly enough. And so they go there and end up living in a cave, and of course the Ammonites and the Moabites came from, I guess they lived there and they didn't have any contact with the outside world. I don't know. Lot's daughters decided, well, after everything that's happened, whether they think there are no more men on the earth or whether they just figure there is no man on the earth who would have them, either way, neither is possible, but the way they were talking. But they decide, well, we got to have kids somehow because, that's everything to a woman in the ancient Near East. So they get dad drunk, and that's a horrible thing. Anyway, but and they have children who they name Ammon and Moab, which is, funny little Hebrew puns on the fact that they're from father, basically. Oh. Moab literally means from father. Yeah. Moab.
Well, they were Jewish.
Huh? Yeah. Name your kid that. Why am I called Moab? Why am I called from dad? We're not talking about that, son. All right. So. Anyway, that's the Moabites, though, and this is what we're talking about here. And it's funny that they're going to flee to Zoar. It's like they're going back where they started from, where they came from. God has this weird little circle going on in their history. But, and he promises that they're going to have a remnant, but that remnant's going to be destroyed. It's funny. It's like Lot has some of the blessings of Abraham, but not all of them. He gets some of that, but he doesn't get all of the fullness of the promises of Jacob and his sons. Yes.
Was his character flawed? Lot's character.
Lot?
His character.
I think he was massively flawed. Yeah, but he is called righteous in the New Testament. Righteous Lot. Yeah,
His daughters got in desperation,
yeah,
and then they decided to take things in their own hands.
so to speak, yeah.
So they had, so that it was incest with their father, but on their part more so than the father, because the father was drunk. They made him drunk.
Yeah.
Well, why'd he get drunk? I mean, he didn't have to drink it.
Well, I don't know. His,
And it
you know,
happened
all of
on-
his
it
riches
happened
were
on
gone.
A couple of events. So, you know, the prevailing theory is that he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Despair will make you do crazy things too. You know, look at his life. His wife is dead. All of his, you know, he was a man of some means and a man of some influence in the city in Sodom. You know, he was one of the elders. He sat among them at the gates of the city. So he's an important guy. And, you know, he has had every, you know, and he's, you know, he may even be remembering that day when he and Abraham were standing up on a high spot looking around, and Abraham's like, okay, what should you like? This is mostly desert, and that is this beautiful fertile territory here near the Dead Sea. So which one would you like, Lot? And he's like, well, duh, Lot. Lot is like, I will take the nice spot that's green and has lots of space for my flocks. And you can have the crummy part, okay? Thanks, Uncle Abraham. And Abraham's like, that's fine, whatever. You know? And
There's another kind of point to that. In a sense, why did God bless that area so plush and green where all that immorality was going on with Sodom and Gomorrah? You know what I'm saying?
because sometimes he sets people up to judge them harder.
I don't like that.
I mean, sometimes he pours out blessings on people, you know, because this is their opportunity to recognize who's blessing them. And occasionally people will say, where is this coming from? You know, maybe the Holy Spirit will move in their heart and convict them and say,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
finally realizing this isn't from me, this is from somebody else, and turn to the Lord. And then other people just double down and double down and double down, and the Lord is like, I blessed you so much, and you never once looked up. You're gone.
Yeah, he gives them up.
Yeah. So,
To whom much is given, much is required.
to whom much is given, much is required. That, yes, that is a very good biblical passage to apply to this, yes. So, anyway, so even the remnant is going to be destroyed, and they will not. In the end, Moab will not prevail, and they don't, obviously. All right. Wow, hey, that was like 3 chapters. Okay, so Isaiah 17, we get to Syria. And this is an interesting passage just because it sort of flip-flops a little bit. It's hard to know what time period it's talking about.
So Damascus is Syria.
Damascus is Syria, yes. Yeah, and I've been referring to these by the country names, but again, Isaiah jumps around. Isaiah sometimes calls them by their country name, sometimes he calls them by the capital's name. Remember? Yeah. So Damascus is the capital of Syria. Ephraim is the capital Samaria is the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom, and Ephraim is the most prominent tribe. So Ephraim, Israel, and Samaria all usually mean the same thing to Isaiah. Jerusalem and Judah, you know, are the southern kingdom as far as Isaiah is concerned, and so on and so forth. All right. So we get to chapter 17, and there is a lengthy discussion about Damascus or Syria. And Isaiah promises that they will be utterly destroyed along with the northern kingdom, interestingly enough. You know, Syria has been going back and forth between joining with Israel to fight Assyria or being taken over by Assyria and used against the northern kingdom. And that kind of goes back and forth in Isaiah's lifetime. But in the end, God promises that Syria is going to be utterly destroyed. And then we get to verses 7 and 8. Somebody want to read chapter 17, verses 7 and 8?
In that day man will look to his Maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. He will not look to the altars, the work of his hands, and he will not look on his own fingers, on what his own fingers have made, neither the Asherim or the altars of incense.
Yeah. It's like, okay, in that day. In what day? When did that happen? Because as far as we know, historically speaking, that didn't happen connected to the fall of Syria. You know, at no point in any of this process did people in any general way say, you know what, the gods we made didn't save us. Maybe we should turn to the maker of heaven and earth. That never happened. So some of this is things that are happening in Isaiah's day, and some of this I think is happening in a day that's yet to come. Because, you know, and he speaks in general. In that day, man will look to his maker. It's not a man, it's not Syrian people, it's man. And, you know, we don't really have an answer for that other than that must still be yet to come because that hasn't really happened yet. It's one of those things that has happened to some extent, you know, as a result of Christ coming. But, you know, that hasn't completely turned over the region, much less the world of men. People still largely worship the makings of their own hands. So, I don't know. I suspect that this is one of those things that has sort of a now and future fulfillment, and this part's mostly in the future. So, let's see here. We see that the nations are going to rise up against this Messiah, against the anointed one, this prince, but he will turn them with a word, we're told. Let's see if I've got that on my list here. Yeah.
13?
Yeah, I'm thinking 12 through 14 maybe, yeah. Somebody, if you want to read verses 12 through 14.
The thunder of many people. They thunder like the thundering of the sea. The roar of nations. They roar like the roaring of mighty waters. The nations roar like roaring of many waters, but he will rebuke them, and they will flee away, chased like chaff on the mountain before the wind, and whirling dust before the storm. At evening, behold terror. Before morning, they are no more. This is the portion of those who loot us, and the lot of those who plunder us.
Yeah. So, again, these are verses that there is no... I couldn't find a commentator who would commit to saying that these verses were fulfilled in any way in history. You know, this never happened in history, obviously. And it seems to be indicative of a future time. And there's a lot of prophecy that suggests that all of the nations of the world are going to converge on this area, and the Lord himself, Jesus Christ, when he returns, is going to single-handedly fight a war with the entire world, with all of the nations of the earth. And it's going to center, most likely, in this area. And he's going to win.
Is that where Armageddon is? In that
It
area?
might be connected with that. It's kind of weird. You know, this gets into the whole, you know, what's the timing of Armageddon thing, because, you know, Revelation sort of makes that out as being maybe, you know, at some certain point in there, and whether that's, you know, whether he establishes a kingdom and then has to fight another battle, or whether that's the battle that begins his kingdom. That's sort of an up for grabs kind of thing. But Armageddon is the ultimate version of this. That's the place where, yeah, Megiddo, where all the nations of the earth converge, and
You say Megiddo, same as?
oh, Megiddo, yeah. The mountain's name is Megiddo, and a mountain in Hebrew is Har. Har Mageddon means the mountain of Megiddo, and it's really talking about probably the plain surrounding that. It's funny because the plains of Jezreel, which is where Megiddo is, I mean, almost every major war that Israel fought in biblical times ended up there. A lot of stuff in Judges happened there. That's where Sisera's chariots bogged down there. Ahab was fighting there. It happened, you know, there's a lot of things that took place in and around that area. And it's just this huge, you know, it's this huge open area, you know, dominated by one or two very large mountains kind of in the area, but a huge open area. You know, I mean, it just looks like a Lord of the Rings set, really. You know, you could just imagine armies and armies and armies just converging from all directions onto a single point. And I don't know. I have a feeling that that single point is going to be, Jesus who's just sort of standing there going, "Oh, are we doing this now? Okay." One word. Rebuke them and they fall. And they flee far away, chased like chaff on the mountains, as it says. And there's a lot of talk in Isaiah, as we've already mentioned, and we're going to continue to mention, about this picture of this young, powerful, coming king who, again, basically single-handedly defeats all the nations of the world. I don't quite know why Isaiah went from Syria to this picture. Syria is kind of near there, it kind of borders the area. That's the Golan Heights there, and that's not very far away from this area. But I don't know. Again, there's a lot of unknowns, and I wish I could say more, but even this morning I was, doing my last minute, okay, maybe I missed something, through all the commentators I have access to, and everybody's just like, well, maybe it's this, but yeah, I don't want to commit. Kyle and Delich just said, a commentator would have to be a prophet to tell you for certain what this meant. And it's like, okay, all right, guys, I get it.
Like the guys that say, this is the person that wrote Hebrews.
Oh, well,
for sure.
Yeah. When we all know it was Barnabas. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, I think you could make a good case for Barnabas, but anyway. So then we get to chapters 18, 19, and 20. And that is dealing with two nations. We're finally going south. We've got Egypt and we've got Cush. We kind of know where Egypt is, right? It's it's on a map, it's the upper right corner of Africa. And, the Nile River is the major thing about it. And then, further south, down where the Nile kind of ends, we've got, or breaks out into a lot of little things, we've got Cush. Cush covers part of what is now Sudan. It is mostly what we think of as Ethiopia, and it would probably be Eritrea, too. You don't hear about Eritrea much. They're a very weird Arab country. I mean, weird in that, they're right in the middle of all of this stuff. They're definitely Islamic, and yet they have mostly been allies to Israel. They have mostly kind of turned their back on a lot of the other crazy stuff that the other Arab nations were doing 20 years ago. I don't know. And I don't know if they've really maintained that, but, they kind of stuck out. But also they're very tiny, and they don't really have a whole lot other than their own boundaries. And well, you can see from the relief map, it's all mountainous right on the coast. There's just not much there. But anyway, Cush is the southern part. So the Egyptians and the Cushites are different races. The Egyptians tend to be lighter skinned. They're more brown than black if you wanted to actually divvy them up. Egyptians have very striking, if you've ever seen the death masks of pharaohs and things like that, they have very striking features. They have in Roman era paintings and busts of Egyptians are interesting because then you can actually compare them. Because Romans have their idealized view of what a Roman looks like, and then their idealized view of what an Egyptian looks like, and it sort of makes the differences stand out. So you've got these wider eyes, and I don't know, these chins that kind of come down to a point, and I don't know, it's just a different features, really. They're a different people group in a lot of ways. Different tribes of people came together to form the Egyptians, whereas Cushites are, a lot more of what we associate with Africa. They're black. They look like Africans. They are definitely out there. And it's interesting. Again, the Bible is great. Because God is no racist. He describes Cushites as really being, and in ancient times, people didn't look at them and look down on them at all. People looked at them and thought, these people are beautiful and they're kind of scary. They described them as tall, smooth warriors. I mean, and that's the picture Isaiah gives you of them too. I mean, even back then they would have been the people in the NBA for sure. But so, chapter 18 describes Cush as being tall, smooth, feared, and mighty. But right now, Cush is fearing something else. They fear Assyria. It's amazing to me that this tiny little mountainous, area up in the north part of the Tigris here, that anybody from up here can control as much of the world as they did. Babylon had a lot more going for it. The Medes and the Persians have a lot more going for them eventually. It is astounding to me that Assyria had an empire that was threatening the Cushites. I mean, that is a long way away, and nobody's army is going all the way down there. So it's just astounding. Now, Cush probably got a lot of their riches from trade working their way up to Egypt and then through the Fertile Crescent. So, that could have been what was driving these wars. But anyway, they fear Assyria because Assyria is a threat to them. Assyria fighting Egypt is fighting Cush as far as they're concerned. These two are generally allied against Assyria, against everybody. It makes sense. They're right next to each other, And God basically promises Cush. God at this point is being fairly nice to Cush. God is promising Cush that that Assyria will be destroyed, but in the end, he says that Cush is going to bring tribute to Zion, and we also we haven't really seen that in the history since Isaiah. There's a pretty good chance that the Queen of Sheba came from somewhere down around here. Sheba is just south in Hebrew, the Queen of the South. And but it seems likely that she came from this general area. So, she certainly brought tribute, but it wasn't military tribute according to the Bible. It was more tribute to the Lord because she came to see what this amazing thing was that all the nations of the world were talking about going on in Solomon's reign in Jerusalem. And she enriched him as a result of that. But this is long after that, and we're told that Cush is going to bring of their treasures to Jerusalem. And there's a few like amillennials and things like that who argue that the Ethiopian eunuch is the fulfillment of this. And okay. That's neat. I don't mind there being some sort of a spiritual component to it, and that's okay. But I don't know. This seems to me a bit more specific than that, and a bit more literal, given everything else that he said. But whatever. Let's see here. I do kind of want to point out. I don't know. There's something in Isaiah 18. The way he writes this is so neat. I don't know, the way he says this. Ah, land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends ambassadors by the sea and vessels of papyrus on the waters. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. All you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountains, look, when a trumpet is blown here. For thus the Lord said to me, I will quietly look from my dwelling like clear heat and sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, when the blossom is over, and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. They shall all of them be left to the birds of prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth. And the birds of prey will summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth will winter on them. Everything up to that point, everybody I read is thinking that this is Cush worried about what's going on up north, especially Assyria, and God basically saying, it's nothing for me. I will just quietly remove Assyria from the list of your problems, Cush. And I love the way it ends. And then verse 7, at that time tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide, to Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. to I don't know, to take all of those words from verse 2 and repeat them in verse 7. Isaiah has such a poetic thing going on. You know, I mean, to put that at both ends of it. You know, he's really he's holding up Cush. God likes Cush. God's a big fan of Cush for some reason. I don't entirely understand it. You know, because and he's not, you know, I mean, he's not entirely positive toward them in these passages, but I don't know, he really likes Cush, and he leaves them all of this dignity for themselves at the end, but basically says, "But you're going to bow the knee. You know, you're going to bring tribute to me in the place of my name in Jerusalem." And then chapter 19, Egypt. We are told that, and this is a complicated passage, and one could easily spend a lot of time on it, and we don't have a lot of time. But verses 1 through 15 are talking about Egypt, and basically it describes that Egypt is going to be broken into many separate city-states. Egypt has usually been mostly one little empire of its own, you know, one little country. I mean, they used to control a good portion of the ancient world. You know, we're talking like Joseph's day, okay? We're talking way, way back. But since then, they've sort of struggled to maintain anything outside of their borders. But they're going to break down even further. What's unusual for Egypt is they're going to break down into a little confederacy, a bunch of city-states that are warring with each other. A little bit, yeah, except they're breaking 5 ways instead of 2. Yeah. I mean, not like our Civil War. They've got their own Civil War, yeah. And but then we're told that they'll be reunited under a slaver king. Yes, a king who makes slaves out of all the other city-states. And they are. And did I write his name down? Nope. Yeah, well. Anyway, in history, though, there is I was probably counting my memory because I was ready for this last week. But there was a king who rose up, not part of the previous pharaonic dynasty, but he became, you know, a pharaoh of a new one for like 1 or 2 generations. And he managed to conquer the others, reunited them, enslaved over 100,000 Egyptians, which back then is a lot of them, Egyptian men, and sent them off to build the Suez Canal, the very first attempt at this. Didn't quite get all the way cut through Suez, but it was a good start. Now remember, the Suez Canal didn't actually get finished until the 1970s, okay? Just so we're all aware. Huh?
Was that like?
I think so, wasn't it? Wasn't it Carter who was around for the Suez Canal?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so. But he was trying. And then we're told that the Nile will dry up and Egypt's power will be broken. And then there's many verses talking about how there will be nothing anybody, whether they're highborn or lowborn, can do. And the Lord is just going to confuse everything. And there have been a few times in history when the Nile has dropped very low compared to where it is now. But the Nile is one of the, you know, as far as natural occurrences go, the Nile is as solid as anything on the on this planet is. I mean, you know, it rises, it falls, it goes with the seasons. They don't have just total outages, so to speak, of the Nile. You know, the Nile does not ever go dry. And this is describing something like the Nile completely drying up. So again, we kind of are suspecting that this is something that happens in the future. You know, that's why it was such a big thing when Moses, you know, a couple of the plagues actually attacked the Nile or the area around the Nile, you know, turning it to blood and that kind of thing. That's why that's a huge thing. I mean, you know, everything in Egypt is thrown into complete and utter chaos instantly, you know, when Moses touches the Nile. You know, it's proving that God, you know, the God of Israel is a God who is far above any of the gods of Egypt. Because the Nile is really the thing they rely on the most. But the Nile completely drying up, that's not something that happened. You know, again, it's come close a few times. It's ebbed and flowed a bit, but we don't really see this.
Senusret?
Hmm?
Senusret? Senusret? Is that the pharaoh?
I don't remember that name. I don't know. I don't think so. But people transliterate things so differently too.
Right.
Yeah, that might be, and that's
Or-
just
or-
not what
or
I'm thinking
Necho.
of. Huh?
Necho.
Necho? It wasn't Necho. No,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't Necho. Necho was earlier than this, but anyway. So again, promises sort of against Egypt, that God is going to basically wreck their economy, and there won't be anything that they can do about it, and they're going to have to, they're going to have to basically submit to his authority. And that's something that's pointed out in other places. I think Zechariah mentions this, and there's at least one other place in the Old Testament that talks about how Egypt, it's going to come down to, if Egypt doesn't bring its tribute to Jerusalem, then God isn't going to send them any water. That God's not going to let any rain happen there at all. That God is not going to flood the Nile. It's crazy. Anyway, and these are all things for the future because they haven't happened yet.
18 is an interesting verse.
1918.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, the 5 cities. Yeah. There, in that day there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. And one of these will be called, ESV has, the city of destruction. Probably, I'm guessing, everybody has the city of destruction, right? Everybody's nodding.
Yeah, there's a note, city of the sun.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's only one letter difference in Hebrew between an or a Hebraized version of the Egyptian word for sun versus destruction. You know, it's Haris or it's something else. And so, and if it's city of the sun, well, there is a city of the sun. That's Heliopolis. On is the Egyptian name for it. This is something that hasn't happened. It's come close. You know, there have not been 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan in Isaiah's day. That would mean Hebrew, essentially, and swear allegiance to Yahweh of armies. Well, that's never happened in Egypt. Not in 5 cities. Not 5 whole cities, but one of them being either Heliopolis or some future city called the City of Destruction. That hasn't happened yet. It says also, in that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. Now that is interesting because there was an altar to Egypt. In fact, there was a whole temple for the Lord in Egypt in the days following Jeremiah. Josephus talks about it. We've found not traces of the temple, but writings about it in Egypt. They did have, there was a Jewish colony down there. And we know from Jeremiah that there were Jews who fled to Egypt. And they stayed. The Lord didn't completely destroy all of them. They stayed and they lived there, and probably, they may have ended up being, because there was a lot of Jews in Alexandria for a while after it was founded. And, that may have been where Joseph and Mary went with Jesus when they were hiding out in Egypt. We don't know. I mean, because we don't have a whole lot of detail at all about the flight to Egypt, other than the fact that they went to Egypt and then they heard they could come back, and they did. So, but they did, after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar in 586, a whole lot of the Jews from the southern kingdom, from Judah, fled to Egypt. In fact, they kidnapped Jeremiah and took him with them. And that's in Jeremiah, by the way. And we're not getting to that this year. And they built a temple and an altar. Priests went with them, and they established some sort of a worship of the Lord. I don't know how the Lord really felt about any of that, because that's not the place that he ordained. The Lord was pretty big on, when you get to the place where I ordained, the place that I have called by my name, that's not it. But, I don't know. He didn't destroy them or anything. That's one of the ways we know that That's one of the ways that we are pretty sure that the Tetragrammaton is supposed to be pronounced Yahweh because of writings in Egypt. So, anyway. Or engravings, I should say, in Egypt. Yeah, this stuff that's in here, I mean, it'll be a sign and a witness, verse 20, to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of its oppressors, he will send them a savior and defender and deliver them. The Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians. The Egyptians will know Yahweh in that day and worship with sacrifice and offering. They will make vows to Yahweh and perform them.
Listen to that ending, though. That's
I know, it's exciting, but that hasn't happened yet.
no. But it's,
Yeah, I mean, but the things that are described there are remarkable, and it ends. This chapter ends verses 16 through 25. That whole section, Yahweh's going to strike Egypt, and then Yahweh's going to heal her, and then he says there's going to be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and you can tell where that's going to go through, and both countries are going to join together in an alliance with Israel, and they're all going to worship together. There's going to be this Egypt, Israel, Assyria alliance that's going to be formed spiritually. Yeah, verse 25. Or verse 24, in that day Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance. Wow. I mean, that's just, in Isaiah's day, that was unthinkable. In our day, that's unthinkable. That's crazy talk. That could never happen. And the Lord is like, oh, it's going to happen. I cannot wait to see how this unfolds. This is going to be so amazing. So, anyway, we've got a lot to look forward to in history, okay? History is not just the Lord comes and then it's all over. There's a ton of other things happening yet to come. And it's going to be really amazing. And we have to end it there. We did it before Isaiah 20. And 3 weeks. Oh, well. We're still doing better than our average. Yes?
you don't think our pollution and everything will kill us before that gets...
No, I don't. No, I don't. I think that, see, this is the great thing about believing that the Lord not only created the world, but maintains the world, I mean, part of the reason why he maintains it is to keep us from damaging it too badly. We are told to use it, make use of it, use the resources. There are going to be things that we use up, and guess what? Maybe the Lord will give us the ingenuity to come up with a different solution. Or we will find out that things weren't as easy to use up as we thought they were going to be. I mean, I was hearing for months there that, the Amazon is burning and all the oxygen's going to go away. And and now they're like, well...
The missionaries come here and say it happens every year.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Just making a big deal about it.
Precisely, yeah. And so, fossil fuels and the oceans are rising or sinking or everything's freezing or boiling or... the Lord is in charge of every one of these things, and he is going to see this thing all the way through. If we could destroy the world, he wouldn't let us. He's like, no, that's my world. You don't get to do that.
Like in the 50s when they were talking about
What?
In the 50s when they were talking about the atomic bombs.
Oh, yeah.
Blow the world up? No.
Yeah. And I was one of the kids, in my, growing up in my generation, I was scared to death of that stuff. I was scared that we were going to, destroy the world with nuclear war, and now it's just, I don't know. I mean, we're some of it's just I'm older and I'm a little bit past that, but some of it too is I learned how to trust the Lord, and I learned that, the Lord is in control of these things, and are things going to get bad? Absolutely. I mean, we'll keep reading in Isaiah, and it's not nice. But, is the Lord going to let us destroy ourselves? No. He has arrogated to himself the right and responsibility of judgment for the world. It is not us. It is him. He will be the judge. He will execute what he wants to do. All right, well, we better pray because Pastor's going to yell at me again. All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are the judge of all the earth, because there is nobody I would rather have in the judge on the bench in my court case than you, because you are a merciful God. I thank you for your Son who pleads my case. I thank you for your Holy Spirit who stands by me and indwells me and gives me the power to do what's right. Lord, I pray that for all of us, we will hear your word continuing into church, that we will understand it, and that you will change our hearts and lives. In Jesus' name, amen.